Hi everyone, it's Yvette Blowitz from SPAITGIRL.com and welcome to the Spirit Girl Talk Show. I'm super excited to be here with you today and with our very special guest, who is Dr. Jud Brewer, a New York Times best-selling author, neuroscientist, addiction psychiatrist, and the thought leader in the field of habit change. He is the Director of Research and Innovation at Brown University's Mindfulness Center, where he also serves as an associate professor. He is the Executive Medical Director at ShareCare and a research affiliate at MIT. Dr. Jud has developed and tested novel mindfulness programs for habit change, including treatments for smoking, emotional eating, and anxiety. His new book is called Unwinding Anxiety, Train Your Brain to Heal Your Mind. Dr. Jud Brewer, thank you so much for being with myself and the rest of the Spirit Girl podcast community globally. I'm truly grateful and honored to be here with you today and everyone else globally.
Well, thanks for having me.
First of all, I love your work. Huge fan. And like I mentioned before the show, big shout out to the Rich Roll podcast because I love his work. And I discovered you on his podcast show. That's how I discovered your book. I actually downloaded the audio version. So it was like you speaking to me, and it's helped so immensely. For the first time, I actually understood what anxiety is. And up until now, Jud, I thought that if we had anxiety or an anxiety disorder, we were mentally ill. There was something so wrong with us that the doctor would say, "You've got anxiety. Take these pills, go talk to a psychologist, see you later." So before we go into your book, Unwinding Anxiety, can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and how you got this interest into neuroscience, psychiatry, and addiction psychiatry?
Sure. Well, it even starts with, in college, I didn't even know that I had anxiety. And in fact, it was showing up as some gastrointestinal distress. I'll spare you the details, but let's just say it wasn't pretty. And I didn't think that was anxiety at all. So when I started medical school, my first day of medical school, I started meditating because I really didn't know how my own mind worked. And meditation was a way to help me, de-stress a little bit, but also I didn't know at the time it was going to really help me start to learn how my own mind worked. And long story short, as I went through my MD PhD program, I had about 8 years just to practice mindfulness on my own. And it was so helpful for me that I decided to dedicate my career to psychiatry because I was seeing these links between this ancient Buddhist psychology and, in modern day psychiatry and psychology. And also I was seeing that folks with addictions were really, really suffering. And this ancient tradition was actually touching on that specifically. And so shifted my career to studying addictions and how mindfulness training might be able to help with that. And started, doing some of the first randomized control trials back in the day, with alcohol and cocaine use, and then smoking. We were finding pretty good results. We even shifted to developing, app-based mindfulness training programs and studying those. And there, so for example, we had developed this app called Eat Right Now to help people with emotional and stress eating. And somebody in that program said that their anxiety was triggering them to stress eat. And they said, could you develop a program for anxiety? And I was thinking, well, I generally prescribe medications for anxiety. This isn't really my lane. But put a bug in my ear to explore that a little bit more. And what I had neglected to see, maybe I slept through a lecture in medical school or something, was that back in the 1980s, people were suggesting that anxiety could be driven like any other habit. And I had this aha moment where I was thinking, wow, I never thought about it that way. So we developed this program for anxiety and started studying it, and it worked gangbusters. We got a 57% reduction in anxiety in anxious physicians. We got a 67% reduction in anxiety in people with generalized anxiety disorder. And so that's kind of how I got into this, but it certainly, started with my own stress and anxiety, and then came just out of a confluence of my research and my clinical interests.
Your mindfulness app, as in terms of unwinding anxiety, when I was listening to the work you do, the results that you've received through those experiments and through the work you do, it profoundly seemed to me to be higher than medication. And you talked about the ratios. Can you just share more about that with our audience?
So when I prescribe the best medications out there for anxiety, there's this term in medicine called number needed to treat, meaning how many people you need to give a treatment to before one person shows a significant benefit. So with medications, with our best medications, that is 5.2, meaning I have to treat over 5 patients before one patient benefits. So I was basically playing the medication lottery. I didn't know which of the 5 was going to benefit, and then I didn't know what to do with the other 4. In our study with people with generalized anxiety disorder, that number was 1.6. So that was pretty remarkable.
Yeah, that's mind-blowing. And that's why I was like, wow, because I've spoken to a lot of people who have anxiety and they've been given scripts and medication and it hasn't worked. And then they go back and try something else. And it's like, they say it's like trial and error. But when I discovered your Unwinding Anxiety and the app and your book and the results, I was like, wow. But before we go into more about mindfulness and the benefits to our brain health or mental health, can you just explain in the simplest terms what anxiety actually is?
I'd be happy to. And I think it can show up in different ways for different people. For example, for me, the stress and anxiety showed up as physical symptoms because there's this very strong mind-body connection. But the simple definition that I like is this feeling of nervousness or worry or unease about an imminent event or something with an uncertain outcome. So that feeling of worry, that feeling of restlessness, I think we all know what that feels like. We've all felt that. So that's the way I think of, this general category of anxiety that we all can relate to.
I've got to ask you, with COVID, everybody has experienced some anxiety, and it's been playing out even in my personal experience. When this hit, it was like trigger. I'm going to touch the door handle, behavior, worry. Am I going to get COVID? Result. But can you explain how now it plays out?
So the first step of working with this, so the way I think of this generally is, if we know how our minds work, we can work with our minds. And the first step is just seeing how we form habits, or how we do probably 95 or more percent of our behavior is based on habit formation. So any habits formed with 3 elements: a trigger, a behavior, and a reward or result, like you're talking about. And this goes back to our ancient ancestors that had to remember where food is. So the idea is, you see the food, there's the trigger, you eat the food, there's the behavior. And then your stomach sends this dopamine signal to your brain that says, remember what you ate and where you found it. So that's how any habit gets set up. So it can be for pleasant things, like things that taste good. And it can also be for unpleasant things, helping us avoid things that are unpleasant, which would help us remember where danger is so we can avoid it. So what's really fascinating about anxiety is that it can get driven in the same way. And you touched on the key element here, which is worry. So anxiety can be that feeling, and that feeling of restlessness or worry can be the trigger for the mental behavior of worrying. So it can be a noun, the feeling of worry, and it can be a verb, worrying. And that worrying makes us feel like we're in control, or at least it makes us feel like we're doing something, even if it's not actually doing anything that's helpful. But that feeling, that little slight feeling of, well, at least I'm doing something, is enough of a reward to feed back, so that the next time we're anxious, we start to worry again. And then we get into habits of worrying. In fact, I have patients and even friends who are they're stuck they're so kind of addicted to worrying. It's like their brain is just constantly looking for something to worry about.
Yeah, I can resonate with that. And before the show, I just talked about the farming experience when you're planting a crop. Then you hear the news or found out that the market's crashed, and instantly the worry starts. So you start worrying about, are we going to get our money back? Are we going to lose money? Are we going to be able to pay the bills? Then it becomes that loop, like you suggested. The reward really, I don't know. I don't think the reward about worrying about if the market's going to go up the next day or down. The worrying, at the end, there was no reward other than burnout. You talked about in your book people burning out through stress and through anxiety. Can you share more about the burnout and what you've discovered in your research?
So when one of the clinical studies we did with the Unwinding Anxiety app, we looked to see if we could help anxious physicians with anxiety. And physicians tend to be a challenging population to work with. I can say this being one of them, where we often don't feel like we have time to do things, and certainly don't have time to take care of ourselves, because we should be taking care of our patients and helping people. So that we started that study by looking at baseline to see if there was a correlation between anxiety and burnout, because people had suggested that was the case, but I hadn't really found any studies that directly attested it. So we looked at that and found a very strong correlation between anxiety and burnout, especially personal aspects of burnout like callousness and emotional exhaustion. So here we then gave people this Unwinding Anxiety app to see if they would do better. And as I mentioned, we got a 57% reduction in anxiety. The really interesting part was we didn't mention burnout a single time in the program. It was about anxiety, but we saw a 50% reduction in callousness. We saw a 20% reduction in emotional exhaustion, which were highlighting this interlinking. Anxiety is directly correlated to burnout. So if we can address one of the root causes, it might actually have bleed over effects, positive effects. You often think of medications, you have to warn people about the side effects. I think about this as, well, we can warn people about the side benefits where they might actually, benefit in other ways that they weren't expecting.
I love that. The side benefits instead of the side effects, because that's incredible. Jud, this whole mindfulness, you have been an advocate for mindfulness. You took like 10 years of training, and then you discovered that if you actually simply stop doing and just would just be, that this whole mindfulness would actually get a lot easier. But for someone tuning in going, what is mindfulness? Why would we even want to do mindfulness? Can you explain more about that, and also your personal journey?
So there are a lot of different definitions of mindfulness. I like to keep things simple and concrete. So here, I like to think of mindfulness as this, awareness. So, and you can think of another side of that coin being an attitude of curiosity. So we bring awareness to something, but we're curious. We're not judging what's happening. We're just truly trying to see it for what it is, without clouding it with our own prejudgments or our own, biases. So that's how I think of mindfulness. And, certainly I started meditating my first day of medical school. And I spent about 10 years kind of trying to take the Western mindset, which is, just do it, like force myself to pay attention to my breath and all this stuff. It was exhausting. I have to say, I would sweat through t-shirts in the middle of winter, in cold winter, long silent meditation retreats, because I was just trying to force myself to meditate, until I realized that mindfulness wasn't about doing, it was simply about being. And so you can think of it as being curious about what's happening in this moment. And what I realized that probably my teachers were trying to tell me for a long time, and I didn't quite get, was that simply observing, when we can see what's happening and we can see our mind at work, right? These habit loops at play, we can start to see how helpful they are and how unhelpful they are. And so you had asked about these 3 gears that I talk about in the book. The first gear is just mapping out habit loops. What's the trigger? What's the behavior? What's the result? The second gear is about observing and basically checking to see how rewarding our habitual behaviors are, whether they're mental or physical. And what I started to see, and what a lot of folks start to see, is a lot of this stuff that's not helpful, they didn't notice it before. So for example, my patients in my clinic, when they want to quit smoking, I have them pay attention as they smoke, and they realize that smoking tastes like crap. And so their brain starts to realize it updates that reward value in their brain, and they start to become disenchanted with smoking. No effort necessary there. When something's disgusting, you're not going to be like, oh, this is great, I'm going to do it more. We start to say, why am I doing this? Right? So no effort necessary. In fact, my lab did a study with our Eat Right Now app where so this is people who had strong cravings to overeat or eat junk food. We would have them pay attention as they overate. And it only took them 10 times of doing this mindful eating exercise where we could measure this reward value. This reward value drops below 0, where they are just disenchanted with overeating, and they start to shift their behavior. So that's what I think of mindfulness is being all about, is helping us see what we're doing, see if it's helpful or not. And if it's helpful, we're going to be more motivated to do it. For example, kindness. When we see how great kindness feels, we're more motivated to do it again. When we see how bad it feels when we're a jerk, we're less likely to be a jerk in the future when we remember that, when we pay attention. So that's what I think of mindfulness as being all about, is just really helping us see clearly.
Do you practice mindfulness each day, like either in the moment when you're present with someone, or do you literally sit down, put earphones in, or what does your mindfulness practice look like personally for you?
So I do both. So sitting down, doing some type of a formal mindfulness practice in the morning when I wake up is helpful. And I find that it's extremely helpful to try to just bring this awareness to whatever's happening as I go throughout my day. Whenever I'm getting caught up in something, can I be aware of that and notice, what am I getting from this? So the idea, I think of it as short moments many times. If I can, that's how we create any habit, right? So the idea is, mindfulness has been so beneficial for me. It's easier to start to create the habit of wanting to do that more, just because it's been so helpful as a habit. So I think of it as, whenever I go throughout my day, can I pay attention and notice when I'm getting caught up in something, bring some curious awareness to that. And that often helps. It just kind of helps me let go in those moments.
We can use this unwinding anxiety you talked about when we're, say, in a meeting and we get this great idea. The mind goes, oh, we should do this. And then, being an anxious person, or we might not realize, we might want to butt in and talk over that person who's doing a presentation. And you talk about a client, or in your book, can you share more about sometimes how we get a great idea, trigger, then we want to do something, and then maybe how we can breathe through it? Because I've tried this and it works, from your book, where we could just notice, become aware, breathe, wait literally our turn, and be the kind person in the room and not speaking over another person.
So you've basically highlighted what it's all about. And so if we think about these 3 steps, or these 3 gears, we can start by mapping out our habit loops around, I've always got great ideas, for example. So what's the trigger? I have an idea. The behavior is to, jump, cut somebody off or speak out in front of the group, like you're talking about. And then we can really pay attention to the result of that. Like, how's that going? Is it really the best idea? Generally, it's not, and is it actually helping the team move forward? Often it's not. So there we can start to become disenchanted with that. And then we can bring in, so the third part of the book, the third step here is what I call the bigger, better offer, the BBO. So we can compare that, what it's like when I cut people off or jump in or talk over people to when I quietly wait. And then if there is an idea that, may be helpful, offer it in a way that's not like, hey, this is it, versus, hey, what do you guys think of this? And notice the difference between the team working through an idea versus me trying to shove an idea down people's throats. It's a no-brainer. Literally, it works so much better. And we get to vet the idea as a team in the same way, but in a way that's more collaborative, more bonding, and just less painful for everyone.
And I say, just from doing Unwinding Anxiety audiobook, Audible, download, I literally last night, even before we got together, was going through habit loops. I didn't even know 10 years ago I had anxiety, but that habit still keeps coming up and plays out in so many ways. And Dr. Jud Brewer, you'd be very happy how I was able to map out trigger, feeling overwhelmed, got to prepare for podcast show, got to do this. The next one, behavior, overwhelmed. Maybe I should get chocolate. That would give me a dopamine hit, make me feel good, give me more energy to just do some more research. Result, why didn't I eat healthy? Why didn't I breathe through it? Anxiety can play out in so many habits, can't it? So chocolate, emotional eating, just not alcohol, as you mentioned, or cocaine or street drugs as such.
Yes, I think anything that can serve as a distraction from the anxiety itself can get reinforced in the same way. And so we've seen a lot of this, with people stress eating when they're anxious, when drinking alcohol, as you're pointing out, going on social media, our phones become these weapons of mass distraction, where we can easily distract ourselves from our anxiety. And then we learn to be addicted to our phones. So all of these things can get reinforced in the same way.
When it comes to drinking, I know so many people, and I've experienced it myself, where you might feel a bit anxious. You try to have a drink to take the edge off the anxiety, the restlessness, nervousness, worry, stress, and your body's humming. And it feels good for the first one or two drinks. But then you drink more and more and more. It becomes very addictive, and then that becomes a daily thing. And then sometimes you might wake up in the morning and your first thought of the day would be, I feel like a drink. Now, we're totally addicted by this point. But what's going on with anxiety, alcohol? But why is it when we're hungover, we still might experience anxiety, and it makes our anxiety worse?
I'm glad you bring that forward. I can even think of some of the patients in my clinic where they describe exactly that. They drink alcohol as a way to numb themselves from their anxiety. And then in the morning they wake up, and the hangover can actually have shared qualities with anxiety, that restless feeling, the dis-ease. And so it can actually trigger people to get anxious again. And then they replay that vicious cycle. So there are these shared qualities of the experience of not only being hungover, but that being shared with some qualities of experience of what anxiety feels like itself.
Melbourne's gone into lockdown here in Australia, and I think the media press was on the news when we're going back to anxiety, COVID, and fear. It said something like this: COVID-19, we had to social distance, obviously wash our hands. Our family were at risk, but it was quite heavy. In terms of what increased my anxiety was when I discovered that I could potentially touch something, have this deadly virus, not know, visit my elderly family member in aged care. And because of that, I could be actually the one to infect or kill my family, my elderly, or people. So that messaging to me was very fearful. It caused a lot of anxiety. And I was so stressed out. I kid you not, my anxiety went through the roof. And I'll be completely honest, I think that's important. And when I discovered, hang on a minute, what if I could just do my best with washing my hands, sanitizing, distancing, like doing the requirements? And would it be okay if I just did that and know that I'm doing all that I can? And that was how I tried to break my cycle, because I really thought I'm not going to survive the COVID-19 pandemic if my anxiety is just like, we're going to end up really sick here if we don't get on top of it. Can you talk more about fear, anxiety, and that whole habit loop and what you've seen during COVID-19?
Our brains, one of the survival functions of our brains is to simulate future events based on past experience. And the best way to do that is to have accurate information in the present moment. So when there's a lot of uncertainty, and there's been a lot of uncertainty with this pandemic, that uncertainty, when you pair that with fear, you can think of fear plus uncertainty equals anxiety. And so that can really drive anxiety, just like you described very nicely. And you also described, well, if that equation, quote unquote, is correct, if we can work with the uncertainty piece, we can actually reduce the anxiety. So, if we can wash our hands regularly, if we can wear, face masks, if we can do these social distancing pieces, we can be more certain about not spreading this physical virus from one person to another. And so in that sense, we can increase the certainty where we have it. And that increase in certainty really can reduce the anxiety.
And you talk also, Jud, about this social contagion. So like if we see a lot of fear-based media or social media, or I'm anxious, my next door neighbor's anxious, like I go to a supermarket, someone kind of comes just a little bit here and I'm like all on edge, like I'm just freaking out. Like, what are they doing coming so close to me? Oh my goodness, like it's just through the roof, this anxiety. Is it true that you talk about social contagion? Well, what's this whole notion, like how we can spread literally anxiety and fear within our communities online and offline?
So social contagion from a scientific standpoint is basically just the spread of emotion from one person to another. And where you can protect and not spread a physical virus, for example, from one person to another by social distancing and doing these things, getting vaccinated, things like that. You can sneeze on somebody's brain from anywhere in the world. So whether it's social media or it's in the grocery store, if we see somebody freaking out, they can be meters away from us. They're freaking out. We're catching their anxiety just by watching them freak out. And so that's where emotion can spread from one person to another.
And in this example, say toilet paper, go to the toilet paper roll, like there's none. And then you got to go and go before 7 a.m., still none. And then people, I think one person had enough toilet paper rolls to last them, the next 10 years. Like it was incredible what was going on. But is this how it can play out also?
So if you think of the extreme end of the spectrum of anxiety, that's where panic comes in. So panic, I think, is defined something like, severe anxiety leading to wildly unthinking behavior. So if we go to the grocery store and we've got our grocery list and we have plenty of toilet paper at home, but we see somebody at the grocery store where they've got a ton of toilet paper, suddenly we start to freak out and we think, oh, I got to get toilet paper. There's a run on toilet paper at the grocery store. And so, it's interesting. We saw this emerge out of no real toilet paper shortage. It was created probably because people were also spreading the social contagion on social media where they're like, there's a run on toilet paper. Quick, get your toilet paper. And so we can see how this is played out. And it's just basically wildly unthinking behavior. People aren't stepping back and saying, wait a minute, I don't need toilet paper. If everybody had stepped back, there would have been no toilet paper shortage at all.
When someone is at home now thinking, oh, that was me, and that's okay. We all joined you. It's all right. There's no judgment here on the Spirit Girl podcast show and with Dr. Jud Brewer. But when someone's going, you know what, I'm emotionally eating at the moment, I'm drinking every evening, they're just looking for ways to distract, to avoid their feelings, numb them, whatever it might be. What would you suggest? I personally have done the habit loop, which I guess for me, the habit loop's going to be, I couldn't do it just in one day. It's going to just play out and I'm going to kind of work through it, a bit like a mindfulness practice. But would you suggest that would be a good starting point, the habit loop, and mapping that out, which you have available on your website as well?
Yes, I would say that's the first place to start working with our minds anywhere here, is just really seeing how our minds are working. And so, as you mentioned, we even created up a simple URL. I think the website's just mapmyhabit.com, which will then redirect folks to my website. But the idea is we put out this free habit mapper that anybody can download and then print out and then just start mapping out their habits. We all can benefit from this.
And Jud, when someone's got like ruminating thoughts or just thoughts running through their head, like they can't get off a topic, it's just like they've either had a fight with someone and it's just going over and over and over again. Is this where the mindfulness, unwinding anxiety, and the mindfulness practice can help? Because you talk about this default mode network, but can you share more about these racing thoughts where we feel like we've got no space, no gap, we're just caught up with it?
Yes, when we're totally caught up in a thought, when it's worry, it's often described as perseveration, where it's kind of like a record. Folks remember what records are. Where
yeah. I love records.
The needle is stuck in a groove, and it's just deepening over and over and over with each revolution. Right. And that's what our minds do, is they play these things over and over and over, and we just get stuck deeper and deeper and deeper. So here, the best way to kind of help lift that needle off the record and move it to a different place is to find something that can help us ground. One of my favorite practices is what's called 5-finger breathing. I have a YouTube video that folks can find, which basically just syncs up people's breathing with tracing their fingers, so that it can really help them find something where they have the tactile sensation of, paying attention to their tracing a finger as they're breathing, they're looking at their hand, they're paying attention to their breath at the same time. That's a great way to kind of reboot the brain to help people ground in the present moment. I
have actually listened to that YouTube. I've done it, and I've even shared it with a friend to talk about, because I found it so profoundly easy. Mm-hmm. And for an overthinker, like my addiction, I could resonate with you when you talked about being addicted to thinking, mm-hmm. and that being the addiction. So I found that to be incredibly good. You help so many people to feel good from within. You really serve and help so many people globally with your work. But how do you take care of your own self so you now don't burn out with the workload that you have, and especially during the pandemic?
That's a great question. So there are two things. One is my own mindfulness practice, and then also seeing very clearly what behaviors help me and help me stay healthy and resilient. So I find exercise to be essential. I find eating clean, food and I tend to eat basically a whole food plant-based diet. And I find that those are really helpful for me for, helping me stay, helping my body and my mind stay healthy. The other thing is I've been fortunate enough to be in a profession that is really rewarding, whether it's my research where I get to learn about all these cool mechanisms of the brain and the mind and get to create these apps and study them. But also clinically, it's very rewarding to work with patients who are really struggling with anxiety or addictions or whatever, and to see them, do better. I've written about some of them in my book because some of their stories are so remarkable. So I get energized when I wake up in the morning and I get to think, this is what I get. It's not like, oh, what do I have to do today? It's like, what do I get to do today? Oh, I get to learn about my own mind. I get to help other people discover how their own minds work, and and we all benefit from that.
Your face is lighting up like it's shining from your inner self and soul and radiating out. But it's interesting, you always talk about the power of kindness, and you have a video on drjud.com, like your website, and you're big on curiosity and kindness, which I love this message. But for our listeners, can you share more how we can turn, say, the fear of anxiety, like being scared of our mind or what's happening, to pretty much curiosity and also more about kindness?
So here, my lab did a study, and it's going to sound pretty obvious when I tell you, but we have to do the research to prove it, where we asked people to describe mental states like anxiety, frustration, things like that, and then kindness, curiosity, connection. And we found that there was an overlap between, say, anxiety and frustration and anger, where they all feel closed and constricted and closed down and contracted, whereas kindness and curiosity feel open and expanded. And then we had people rank, which ones feel better? Well, it's a no-brainer. Kindness and curiosity feel better. So there's this shared quality of experience between kindness and curiosity, of this opening. And so we can actually, when we're closed down in anxiety, if we inject a little curiosity, we can't be closed and open at the same time because they're binary opposites. And so when we're feeling anxious, we can get curious. Oh, what does that feel like in my body? Is it more on the right side or the left side, for example? And even just that, I don't know, is it more on the right side or the left side? That starts to open it up right there. And then that curiosity can help us start to see, oh, these are simply physical sensations. These are emotions. They come and go, as compared to, this is who I am. I'm anxious and it's going to last forever. So that's where we can inject the curiosity. And often I see people judging themselves. Oh, why can't I fix this? Why can't I be better? Am I going to be ruined forever? So that self-judgment, they can map out those habit loops, see how constricted that feels, and then compare that to being kind to themselves. Well, kindness feels better. And so they can bring in those bigger, better offers of curiosity. They can bring in those bigger, better offers of kindness. And as they do that and they see that it feels better, their brain will naturally move in that direction.
I've been sharing your apps basically because, like, if we're in Australia or anywhere in the world and we can't physically book in to see you, come into your practice, I just love how you created these apps and how profound and how they work and how easy now. When I think of technology, this is one great advancement that we can have access to you. Because can you share about how you meet up with your people that are doing the Unwinding Anxiety once a week? It's incredible what you're doing.
Yes, one thing that we do, so thanks to technology, we can use Zoom. We've been doing this for about 5 years now, where anybody that uses any of our apps, whether it's our Craving to Quit app for smoking or the Eat Right Now app for eating, or even the Unwinding Anxiety app, anybody that's using one of those programs can join us once a week. So we meet at noon Eastern US time on Wednesdays. And we actually have another group. I don't run it, but somebody in the UK runs this early in the morning on Tuesdays so that we can reach folks in Australia and Asia. But we meet up once a week for anybody in the world to join the group, and anybody can ask questions. And I and my two other facilitators will work with them, because the idea is we can all come together as a community. Community is really helpful. And when we do this exploration together, it helps everyone in the group. So we'll have hundreds of people come together, and it's amazing how supportive that community is. So people can share, they share some pretty intimate stuff because they want the help, and it's amazing how others benefit from that as well. So I really enjoy doing those. I've been doing that basically every week for the last 5 years, because it's just really wonderful to come together as a community. And also, I learn every time I do an inquiry, an exploration with somebody as well.
Yeah, I absolutely love how we have access to you and your team, and globally we can do this, because you did talk about this in your book, how I definitely have felt this, where you feel like you're in the dark. You know, you pictured us in a room and we're kind of stumbling around, and then the unwinding anxiety kind of turns on the light because you've done so much science and research behind it, and you're meshing. What I really love is you're kind of meshing the mindfulness practice in and educating us on that, but the habits and the addiction and anxiety, because up until then, anxiety, it was something you got from stress. It was in your DNA genetics. So if your grandmother had a mental illness or your mum, you were going to get it. It was so old school that we're like, what is anxiety? Not a topic I knew at high school. I grew up, it was like someone was unwell, you know, mentally ill. And I have this idea, I've always been fascinated. I want to ask you, actually, as a neuroscientist and a psychiatrist, I believe now we're at the forefront where we're learning about, it's to do with brain, you know, brain, body, mind connection, that even if we did get labeled by the doctor, ooh, you have anxiety, or maybe it's the psychiatrist that says you have anxiety, you need to talk to someone about this, that there is real hope that we are not going to be ill for the rest of our lives, that we can work through this. What's your thoughts on this?
Well, my sense right now is that I think there's one condition that actually we probably all share, and that's called the human condition. You know, and if you think about that, you know, our brain, it's just our survival brains that are just, you know, they're a little tweaked in a way that's probably not helpful. And the nice thing is we all can learn how our minds work. And in that sense, we can learn to work with our minds. So this human condition that we all share is not it's not something that we're doomed with, or somebody labels us with it and suddenly, you know, there's something wrong with us. No, this is just our poor survival brain trying to help us out a little bit. And if we read the manual, we can actually learn to work with it.
I love this. Read the manual and we can actually learn to work with this. So you're providing so much hope, Dr. Jud Brewer, because I know I've spoken to so many people who have been told they've got anxiety, they need to take medication, meditate, de-stress, maybe change your job. And they're so embarrassed prior to COVID-19 to tell anyone, so ashamed. They feel like they're a failure, like something like, why me? Why did I get anxiety and my brother didn't? Oh, I'm not mentally as strong as him. And they really are so fearful. So one positive to come from COVID-19 is I'm seeing an increase in everybody wanting to learn about anxiety. I'm seeing the social stigma, or call the mental stigma, collapse. It's becoming the new norm that we talk about this, like on the podcast show today, you have Unwinding Anxiety app. These conversations are happening. But what I love about your work is you got the aha moment, as Oprah would say, aha moment, where you went, oh, this could be just a habit. This could be just a habit loop. Hang on a minute. I'm going to explore more about this. So thank you so much for having that moment and going to all the effort that you do and doing all the research you do. It's really life transforming. And I honestly, from the bottom of my heart, with so much gratitude, say thank you for all that you are and all that you do. Because you're not only changing my life, but many people, millions and millions and millions and millions of people globally. And your TED Talk, I think, is one of the highest ranking TED Talk YouTube. But thank you, Dr. Jud Brewer, for all that you are and all that you do.
Well, thank you. It's really my pleasure.
Now, how can we stay in touch with you after this show and connect with you moving forward?
My website is drjud.com, drjud.com. So folks can, we have a bunch of free resources there. They can learn about the book or the apps that I've mentioned. I'm also on a little bit on social media. On Twitter at Jud Brewer, JUDBREWER. On Instagram at Dr. Jud, Dr. So those are places that folks can stay connected.
And I gotta say, I'm so glad you scienced the shit out of this topic. Like, I gotta say it, Dr. Jud Brewer, because it's just so incredible. And thank you again for all of the time you've spent with us. So we'll say goodbye. Dr. Jud Brewer, I can't wait to have you on the show again when your next book or your next app or who knows what's coming forth. But thank you, because you've just given us so much hope, some real tools that will help us break addiction and feel better from within. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
We'll say goodbye to Dr. Jud Brewer. Be sure to subscribe, to leave a rating and review, and to tell someone you love to. And together, let's feel good from within.